Hi there. This is a homily for the last Sunday of the year, and as you know, the calendar finishes at this point. In fact, it finishes with the beginning of Advent next Sunday, and this week essentially is dominated by the image of Christ the King. And this is where the whole of the plan of history has been going, starting all the way back in the beginning with Abraham and coming forward to the amazing events of Jesus' life and him here in these readings today announcing the future coming end of the world. But we have to go back a bit to start to understand this. And what we need is to appreciate that there was already a prophecy in Ezekiel that the Lord, who's getting frustrated with his people trying to essentially trip over themselves, and so he says, I myself will look after and tend my sheep. I will rescue them, I will seek out the lost. And then the punchline, which is why this text is in this readings, I will judge between one sheep and another, between rams and goats. And that is, if you like, the springboard into the gospel. Now, already here we are beginning to realize that the intervention by God, the change that is caused by God, is in fact due to the collapse of the world. It's not a kind of expected high point in history when everything's going beautifully. This is when humanity has wrecked history, and we do a wonderful job of that. The last century, the tens of millions of people who were killed without any thought at all. And, we're actually doing a pretty good job this century as well. So what God is saying is basically, if you make enough of a mess of things, then I'm going to step in. And so that's the Ezekiel reading. The psalm picks up the theme of the Lord as the shepherd, and you know the psalm very well. Psalm 23, and again it has all these idyllic images. He will lead me into green pastures, beside restful waters he leads me. He lays a table before me in the sight of my enemies. Only goodness and kindness shall follow me all the days of my life. Already we are experiencing as far as these readings are going to go, what the present life is for people who live totally with God. And this doesn't matter if you're a layperson, if you're a priest, if you're a lawyer, if you are somebody who collects the garbage, whatever it happens to be. If your heart is truly open to God, then the Lord is your shepherd even in this world. And despite what's going on outside, inside in my spirit, I am with God, experiencing his shepherding and experiencing his help to deal with the terrible things that come my way, whether I have anything to do with them or not. And the epidemic is just one of many forms. We could also point to the degradation of the culture, etc., which is awful. I mean, it's really degrading human beings. But inside in our hearts, we can be untroubled by that. We can be interested and we can want to change it. That's not being indifferent, but we will be calm in our center because literally we're standing with God. Now the second reading goes back to the theme of judgment, and Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and he explains then that at his coming, Paul knows that Christ has already ascended into heaven. At his coming, his second coming, those who belong to Christ then will be the first fruits of all that Christ has done. And then comes the end when he hands over his kingdom. Now, before he does that, he will have to judge. And so here you have everything is subjected to him. He, in fact, it will exercise judgment on both the good and the evil. Now, when we lastly come to the gospel, we have Matthew 25, the great vision that Jesus paints of the end of the world, and he titles it, When the Son of Man Comes in His Glory. And so this already has the feel of the finish, because the glory is normally a word applied to God himself, and consequently here you are seeing something, a manifestation of God that is far beyond anything we can imagine. With him come the angels. He sits on his glorious throne. He then, as a shepherd, separates the sheep from the goats. So that's all the education about judgment. Why? Because if we know there's going to be a last judgment, maybe we'll get our act together in this world. That's the hope in God's mind. Ezekiel knows that basically we're not going to do a terribly good job of it, and consequently God is going to have to intervene. But here comes the pedagogy for us. We are listening, or rather Jesus is explaining, and we are listening, that in kind of a behaving like a good audience, we then kind of ask the king what is the criterion for me being judged. And basically he says, when I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And the righteous will answer him, when did we see you hungry and thirsty, and so on. And basically he will say, whatever you did to the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. So there is the lesson for us now. We have no clue when the final judgment will come. The point of all this is that today, when I leave the church, I will go out into the world as somebody who feeds the hungry, helps the stranger, etc., etc. Not because I want to look good, not because I want another feather in my cap, but because I see in the one who is hungry or thirsty, or the one who is a stranger, I see Jesus Christ in that person. Jesus has taken on himself all of humanity, even the humanity of this hungry person, this thirsty person, and this person who's marginalized in whatever way, the stranger. And in that person, if I see Christ, and this is now the act of faith that I should be bringing to each charitable act that I do, that I see Christ in that person, therefore I do what they need to help them. And this is the lesson. If you do not do for one of the least of these little ones, you did not do it for me. Because what we battle to deal with is the fact that humanity is unified in Jesus Christ. He's taken on the whole of humanity. The fact that we are treated as separate individuals is really more of an enlightenment curse, if you like. It's a misunderstanding of humanity, and we really should be seeing the whole of humanity, which means then that we do things for the good of the whole of humanity, not just for this group of people who are going to vote for me, and just for that group who I think are going to get some credit because well, I recognize that they're important. None of this depends on me. All these human beings were died for by Jesus Christ, and He has decided what is good for all these people. We are just ministers of Christ's goodness. A lot of material in those readings, but basically we are learning. If there is a judgment in the future, I am preparing myself for that judgment right now. Have a beautiful day and stay safe.